Under head coach Kirk Ferentz, Iowa football is a uniquely weird program. You could say that it is ultra orthodox in play style, in that the Hawkeyes prioritize defense and special teams. They care about tackling, discipline, creating turnovers on defense, and limiting turnovers on offense. They care about being developmentally sound, having great strength and conditioning, all at the expense of offense and offensive output, more specifically, in terms of producing numbers. They do produce great tight ends and offensive linemen for the NFL, and they have produced even great running backs and wide receivers and even quarterbacks under Kirk Ferentz, if you want to go all the way back to Brad Banks, who was a Heisman finalist Iowa quarterback, if that's hard to believe. But they do not have great offensive numbers in terms of scoring offense. They don't typically put up a ton of yards. Offense has always been a simple pro-style system. You could also make the argument that Kirk Ferentz just hates offense, but I think that that is ultimately too basic for any college football coach who is successful, as he has been. The Hawkeyes have participated in 2 of the previous 3 Big Ten championship games, and while they have gotten dominated in both appearances, losing 42-3 against Michigan in 2021 and 26-0 in 2023, overall, by Iowa standards, going 10-4 in both of those years, winning the division, beating their rival Wisconsin last year in 2023, the year before that in 2022, beating Minnesota in 21 and 22, beating Nebraska in 21 and 23. They've really controlled the West in the previous 3 seasons. In fact, in 2022, they were in the driver's seat to yet again appear in the Big Ten championship game, but Nebraska beat them in Kinnick Stadium under interim head coach Mickey Joseph. That Husker squad finished 4-8. What I want to talk about today is entering a 2024 season in which divisions are now abolished and it's just the best teams by conference strength of record, head-to-head win, and all these different regulations and rule changes that determine who goes to Indianapolis and not just who sits at the top of the 2 divisions. Are the Hawkeyes still Big Ten championship game contenders? And with the arrival of new offensive coordinator Tim Lester, and with Iowa reigning in the top 50 in terms of returning production, and teams like Michigan losing most of their production, Ohio State not returning as much production as people would think, and programs like Penn State and Oregon still having questions, is Iowa, even in the slimmest of realities, an actual Big Ten title contender? That's what we're going to be talking about here on College Football with Sam. But before we dive any deeper, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so that you can get notified when I release more Iowa football, Big Ten football, and college football content. This is the same for my channel and really every channel, but seriously, liking the video to get us in the algorithm and subscribing helps us to continue to produce the best Big Ten football content on YouTube. Leave a comment down below giving your 2024 Iowa football record prediction. Do you think that they're going to be a top 25 team next season? And do you think they make the Big Ten championship game or not? How do you think that they will finish in not just the regular season, but the postseason, whether that is the Big Ten championship game, a bowl bid, college football playoff spot, or maybe you think that with the new scheduling rules and without having the privilege of staying in a weaker Big Ten West, you think that Iowa's just going to fall apart and completely miss a bowl game? Let me know your opinion, your analysis in the comment section. You probably see something that I don't. And last but certainly not least, this is something that's very important to keep this channel running, is if you want to support the channel, check out my Patreon page via the link in the description or in the pinned comment. There will be an article released tomorrow. It's taking a long time, I know, but it will detail my March top 25 with about a paragraph for every top 10 team, giving my analysis on them, and then a few seconds or sentences, but also seconds, because it takes a couple seconds to write a few sentences, of my time, brief thoughts on teams 15 through 25. Well, actually, teams 10 through 25. So the remaining 15 teams that are not inside of the top 10. Thanks to Crash2488 for being a Heisman member and sponsor of this channel. Thanks to Spencer Bringhurst, Chris Lane, and SFS Inverted for being All-American members and sponsors of the channel. And thanks to Will Loftus, Gabriel Calendar, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Zubin Zah, and Janisha Cockrell for being all conference members and sponsors of the channel. You can also check out my merchandise page via the link in the description or the pinned comment to get an Iowa-themed College Football with Sam t-shirt, or you could also say a College Football with Sam Iowa t-shirt. Show support for the channel and for your school. And we have those Big Ten school themes for every Big Ten school now. Oregon, UCLA, USC, and Washington shirts just dropped on the merchandise page. But thank you very much for listening, and without further ado, let's get right back into it. I want to start off with the offense, because the offense is, at this point, and will be so every year that Kirk Ferentz returns, the most important and simultaneously painful part to look at in regards to Iowa football. The defense is a known. They just are. Whether they lose most of their starters in production or they return them, we know that Phil Parker will produce good defense. He will. His defenses will be great at tackling. They will create interceptions, turnovers, passes defended. They will be great against the run. That's been probably the only problem of Iowa defenses over the previous few seasons, as long as I can remember, is stopping the run. And I think that, I don't know necessarily, I think a large part of that is Big Ten offenses are much better at running the football than they are passing the football. The Big Ten in a year-in, year-out basis features some of the best rushing offenses and best offensive line play. So at the same time that I think that Iowa is better at developing secondary players and they're naturally better at defending the pass from a schematic and developmental standpoint, Big Ten offenses are also better at running the football. So that is why you see sometimes that disparity between Iowa's pass defense and their run defense. But their run defense is still a great run defense. It just does not have the same eye-popping play and statistics, whether it's Cooper DeJean or whether it's Riley Moss, or whether it's Sebastian Castro who's returning. We'll talk about the defense more, or Xavier Nwankpa, who was a 5-star in a previous Iowa recruiting class. I think it was the 2022 recruiting class, if I remember correctly, because he will be a junior in 2024. So in the 2022 recruiting class, chose Iowa over Ohio State and every other Power 5 program. But we'll talk about the defense later. The offense brings in a new OC in Tim Lester after Brian Ferentz was let go by order of the Hawkeye athletic director, and they return most of their 2023 production, 80% of it. They rank 12th in this category. They're 12th out of all offenses in terms of returning production. Now, if you have access to Bill Connolly's preseason 2024 S&P Plus, those numbers, factoring into past performances and so on, only produce what is projected to be the 108th best offense in the country. That's how bad Iowa's offenses have been. In the past 3 seasons, for example, in 2021, Iowa only scored 23.4 points per game on offense. In 2022, Iowa scored only 17.7 points per game on offense, 123rd out of 131 teams. And in 2023, Iowa scored 15.4 points per game. And in 3 out of their 4 losses, and all 3 of those losses being to ranked teams that finished inside the top 25, Iowa lost against Penn State, Tennessee, and Michigan a combined. This right here is just painful. A combined 92-0. Combined 0-92. That was the scoring margin between Iowa and their 3 ranked opponents they played in their 14 games. Offense putting up nothing against teams with great defenses. Against Wisconsin, who Iowa beat 15-6. 7 of those points were on a long busted run by LaShawn Williams, and Iowa's defense constantly had to force turnovers and flip the field using their excellent special teams to come out with more than 10 points. I mean, it is insane how bad this offense has been, and I shouldn't be lecturing here because this is a known, especially if you're an Iowa fan watching this video. But changes were forced at hand by the school administration, who just recognized how bad the offense was. That's a teller there that the athletic director has to intervene to fire a coordinator. Perhaps that's not a good sign for the football program at large. But Tim Lester is certainly an upgrade at offensive coordinator. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Lester did produce some respectable offenses when he was the head coach of Western Michigan from 2017 to 2022. He was a senior analyst at Green Bay in 2023. And starting this season, right now, moving forward, from what I can imagine, he will be Iowa's offensive coordinator. And I say moving forward because as long as he doesn't put up the same terrible numbers, and I don't see that happening, Kirk Ferentz has no incentive to fire him. Kirk Ferentz has proven time and time and again he cares more about defense, special teams, and as long as the offense produces okay quarterback play, great offensive line play, as long as they can control the clock, run the football, and produce more touchdowns than interceptions with as few of interceptions and fumbles surrendered as possible, he's okay. You don't need to put up 40 or even 35 or heck even 30 points per game to please Kirk Ferentz on the offensive side of the football. And with all 5 starters on the offensive line returning, Kadyn Proctor coming in, really coming back as he played high school ball in Iowa, was at one point committed to Iowa for the 2023 recruiting class, but he went to Alabama, started there as a true freshman at tackle, earned all SEC freshman honors, wasn't a great offensive lineman, but the potential's there, and him, along with his unit, got much better at run blocking as the year went on, got better at pass blocking as well, but noticeably a great offensive line by the end of the year in terms of rushing offense. He transfers in along with all of this production returning on the offensive line. I got to think to myself, could this be a Joe Moore Award caliber offensive line? And if it is, with running backs like LaShawn Williams, Caleb Johnson, Jezian Patterson, could this be a lethal rushing offense? Could this be a run game that you're scared of if you are a Big Ten defense? It's an interesting question, and I think one that needs to be meditated on and thought about, because Proctor is, SEC caliber offensive lineman, means he's a Big Ten caliber offensive lineman. Every running back and every wide receiver, except for Nico Reganey, come back, and most tight ends return, except for Eric All, who was injured in the middle of last season. Luke Lachey comes back, injured last year, and Addison Ostrenga, he comes back. Eric All led the Hawkeyes in receiving yards last season with 299, which just shows absolutely how sad that offense was that he got injured in the Wisconsin game. But Caleb Brown returns, Seth Anderson, Deontay Vines, Luke Lachey had 131 receiving yards. Addison Ostrenga had 192 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. He only averaged 6.2 yards per reception. This offense was terrible. They suffered through a lot of injuries, like the defense, but the team found a way to crank out wins. And on top of This offense being experienced, the offensive line being big, physical. I talked about Kadyn Proctor and gave him praise, but at center, Logan Jones, that's an all Big Ten center, could be an All-American center. Connor Colby and Jennings Dunker are great guards. Nick DeJong is projected, according to ourlads.com. Don't know if this is completely accurate, but he's projected to be in the rotation at guard. Tackle last season. Mason Richmond, he's been with the program for many seasons as well. There's a lot of starting experience on this offensive line with several all Big Ten players. And Kadyn Proctor in particular has that high ceiling All-American NFL potential. And Iowa's known to groom NFL offensive linemen. McNamara returns on top of all of this. Now, McNamara last season did not have an awesome offensive line. It was a better offensive line than the one Petrus had to play under in 22 and 21, but there were some injuries on the offensive line, plus it was Brian Ferentz coordinating everything. How good could it have been? McNamara got injured tearing his ACL against Michigan State. He's back. At Michigan in 2021, this is coming from a Michigan fan, McNamara, not a great quarterback, but a great leader, someone who, in terms of greatness, I think fits in that category when it comes to making minimal mistakes, particularly in the realm of turnovers as possible. Great decision maker. I think he'll make a great coach in the future. And if he has a successful year at Iowa under Tim Lester, who I know will develop him better and scheme the offense around him in a superior manner compared to what Brian Ferentz did, maybe he can up his NFL draft stock to being a backup in the league. McNamara will play well behind a great offensive line, and it looks like Iowa will have that this coming season. On the defense, Iowa returns only 58% of their 2023 production. They're 65th nationally in this category. I'm not going to spend as much time on the defense, despite the fact that they don't return as much, because there isn't as much intrigue here. Yeah, they lose Logan Lee. They lose Cooper DeJean. And they lose one other defensive end. They return Deontay Craig. I'm forgetting who that other defensive end is. That's unfortunate. But they return plenty of their starters. They return both their linebackers in Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson, and all the defensive backs except for Cooper DeJean come back. And Iowa was playing for several games without Cooper DeJean because he was injured late in the season, injured in November. They also return their kicker, the Hawkeyes do, in Drew Stevens, but unfortunately Torrey Taylor leaves the program. It looks like Rice Dakin, a true freshman, will start at punter, but also Ty Neeson is in the room, so they will be competing for that starting punter spot. And I'm lumping in special teams with defense because LeVar Woods, much like Phil Parker, is a wizard at his position. He is. Great special teams year in, year out for Iowa under Woods. It's the same thing for Parker. Great defense year in, year out. This unit loses key players, I know, but they return so much, particularly at linebacker, which is the most important position on defense. Sebastian Castro was graded inside the top 10 for corners per Pro Football Focus. Deshaun Lee and Germani Harris are experienced, good starters. Xavier Nwankpa is similar in terms of talent to Kadyn Proctor. You have that blue chip talent there. He will be one of the best safeties in the country. Heck, he could be the best safety in the country. And Quinn Schulte alongside of him, you could have the best safety room in the country at Iowa, at the best secondary for Iowa in the nation. And that is with Cooper DeJean, who's projected to be a first-round pick, leaving. And Iowa's not recruiting at a top 25 level at all. That's impressive. It's very impressive what Phil Parker does with his defenses and how he develops them, nurtures the players, and he's a great coach. Deontay Craig makes a return at defensive end along with Yaya Black at defensive tackle. I think this defense all around will be loaded. I think it's obvious to say, based off of 2 departures on the defensive line and only 1 departure everywhere else, the weakness will probably be the defensive line. But Aaron Graves, another not quite 5-star like Proctor or Nwampka were, but blue chipper, high-ranked 4-star out of high school. He played as a true freshman, true sophomore last season, will be a true junior this year at defensive tackle. I really like him, and I like this defense a lot. I do. In fact, in studying for this video and researching for my top 25, I feel like I've done a better job researching this year compared to any other. It's even given the fact that with college and some other things, including slowing down for the preseason, that I feel like I haven't been producing as much content, or I've been more tired. Anyway, the more I research Iowa, the higher I get on them. And this defense, I do think that even with the loss of DeJean, there is a good chance this defense improves from last season, because you're returning, again, entire linebacker core, most of the secondary, which reloads yearly no matter who leaves and who comes back. And the defensive line is filled with experienced studs like Deontay Craig, Yaya Black, and a player in Aaron Graves who's 2 years younger than both of them in terms of status, in terms of eligibility, but he has the talent required to be a great defensive tackle. And he's been in the rotation for a long time, ever since he stepped foot and played his first game. He's been in the rotation. So I love this defense. I think it's obviously going to be stronger than the offense. It's not as intriguing as the offense, though, because no staff changes, and we have that reputation and the evidence to support an expectation, really of my own, but I think of everyone else's too, that Iowa will have a great defense yet again. So there's more intrigue on the offensive side of the ball. But let's look at the overall roster situation. Talk a little bit about recruiting, offense and defense, and look at the strengths and weaknesses of this roster. Iowa is bringing in the 36th best overall 2024 recruiting class with 22 commits. 9 of those commits are blue chip players, and Kadyn Proctor is the only transfer coming in, but he may have the biggest impact out of all of them. Started at Alabama at offensive tackle. Iowa's offensive line last year in terms of pass protection was better than Alabama's. In terms of run blocking, though, that Alabama offensive line toward the end of the year, you saw it against Michigan. We saw it against Georgia, even though Georgia's defense did admirably given their struggles against the run all season long. Kadyn Proctor was and is a good player, and I think that he will benefit an experienced offensive line that is in need of some NFL upside. And I think that he will benefit developmentally as well, as I think that Iowa, as of just last season, I think, had a similar strength and conditioning program to Alabama and a better offensive line development. Alabama's offensive line has really struggled developing and utilizing their talent since the end of the 2020 season. The Alabama offensive lines in 21, 22, and 23 just were not up to the Nick Saban standard, much like the rest of the team wasn't. Getting back to Iowa, the offense will be stacked in the offensive line. They'll be stacked at tight end. They'll have a strong running back room. The defense will have an elite pass defense, and they'll tackle hard yet again. Areas that I think have good depth are running back, with Williams, with Patterson, and with Johnson. At tight end, with Lachey and Ostrenga. On the offensive line, with Proctor, with Jones, with Dunker, with Colby, with Richmond, and at linebacker with Higgins and Jackson, and at cornerback with Castro, Lee, Nwampka, Schulte, and Harris. I think the only area that doesn't have strong depth, but weak depth either, kind of that middle ground. Sometimes I have multiple positions in that area, in that limbo for different teams. For Iowa, I think it's pretty clear, pretty black and white. I think that only the defensive line, and that's both defensive tackle and defensive end, that have questionable depth. And questionable depth by Iowa standards. I think if an injury was to be suffered by Deontay Craig or Aaron Graves or Yaya Black or Ethan Hurkett, if any of those four projected starters were to be injured, I think you'd see a severe, not exactly severe, but you would see a noticeable drop off in terms of play. It wouldn't be severe though. That's not the correct word. That's a word that should be used for areas with bad depth, like quarterback. McNamara was not great, not even good. I'd say bad last year before his injury. Deacon Hill was much worse, and anyone with a brain and sets of working eyes, regardless of those eyes are totally functional. You could have like 10,000 vision and see that Cade McNamara was a better quarterback than Deacon Hill. Wide receiver, I think, is similar. I think that if Seth Anderson or Caleb Brown were to be injured, that wide receiver room would quickly fall into the somehow fall further into the depths of irrelevancy. And that's not trying to be mean. I'm just giving my honest opinion. I could not play football whatsoever at the level that any of these players I'm talking about, walk on, standard scholarship player, or future NFL star, or otherwise. But I'm giving my assessment. It's very clear the defense, in terms of not just training and not just terms of past coaching, schematics, and ability, in terms of depth and straight up quality of individual players, defense is much better than the offense outside of the offensive line, which is an area that I thought Iowa was going to have a good offensive line this coming season. Looking at what they returned at the depth chart and then adding into the fact that Kadyn Proctor get was big, this is going to be a offensive line that contends for the Joe Moore Award, and that is huge. That's massive. When teams have elite defenses and Joe Moore Award winning offensive lines, as long as they are not a total disaster in every single skill position possible, which I don't think Iowa is. They're great at tight end, good at running back, and I do think quarterback will take a step forward. It's typically indicative of a team who truly belongs in the top 25 from a power ranking and performance standpoint. And Kirk Ferentz is a coach who always might be too strong of a term, but from what I've seen, typically performs above power ranking expectations and predictions, because power rankings typically include recruiting rankings. Style points often factor in as well for power rankings, and Kirk Ferentz is not about either of those things. A talented team, a well-developed team, an experienced team, and a team with some punch on both sides of the ball with a coach like Kirk Ferentz. You get the Mark D'Antonio teams at Michigan State from 2011 to 2015, excluding 2012, where they compete for championships, even though in theory they have no business doing so. They end up competing for championships and New Year's Six Bowls and beating top 10, top 15, top 25 teams, whether in close, painful, wanting to gouge your eyes out fashion, like Michigan State did against Michigan and Ohio State in 2015, or in 2014, the way they were dominating Nebraska for several quarters at home, or in 2013, I think is an even better example. They dominated, they controlled Ohio State in that Big Ten championship game, particularly at the end where they just were manhandling Ohio State on fourth down and controlling the line of scrimmage. And I think that this Iowa team can exceed expectations and can shoot above what their mean performance has been, particularly over the past 3 years. And I say over the past 3 years, and don't go further back in the history books, because COVID is weird, and I do count COVID in terms of the fact that it mattered. But from a power ranking standpoint and from a performance standpoint, it was a really strange year with all the game cancellations, the season cancellation for the Big Ten, and then it was jump started and rejuvenated shortly after it was canceled. It was just a very confusing year, and most teams did not perform to the level that they would have otherwise, in my opinion, if they had a regular season. Penn State, for example, in 2020, if they played a normal year, if the pandemic didn't happen, which I know it's totally alternate history, but whatever. Micah Parsons doesn't opt out. They don't start the year 0-5. Jim Harbaugh and Michigan do not go 2-4. I count it for the fact that in reaction to those seasons, Harbaugh and Franklin, for example, made changes, but from a roster standpoint, that season's very hard to judge. And before then, you don't really have any players, or if you do, you have very few players, particularly on teams like Iowa, where they're very senior and experience laden, that were enrolled and with the program before 2020. But alas, here we are. Iowa does have multiple advantages compared to other Big Ten teams heading into this year. All starting offensive linemen return, as I've mentioned earlier. They may have a Joe Moore Award caliber O-line. Let me name you programs that probably won't have a Joe Moore Award caliber offensive line in the Big Ten this coming season. Everyone, and I mean everyone, except for Oregon, Michigan, and Ohio State. And out of those three, Michigan is benefit of the doubt because of their development at the position. They brought in Josh Preby, Hinton returns, and Crippen's a proven backup, but they don't have nearly the experience that Iowa does. And there's an argument in my mind that says they don't have the depth either. Ohio State is in that category because of their returning production there and upside, like Iowa, but they don't have the proven performance that Iowa does. They don't. And I'd argue they don't even have the depth. Here's an example. Nick DeJong, according to ourlads.com, is a projected backup. Nick DeJong is probably a better offensive lineman than the average Ohio State starting offensive lineman. And Seth McLaughlin, you can't compare him as a center to Logan Jones, who's a much superior center and better player. Oregon returns Josh Connerly Jr. and a Johnny Cornelius at tackle, and they should have a great offensive line. That's the only offensive line that, looking at things from a preseason perspective, I think compares to Iowa's. I would actually say that Iowa is probably just below Oregon in that area. That's a big advantage, having top 3, top 4, and in the best possible scenario, the best trench play offensively in the Big Ten. That's a huge advantage. Pair that with McNamara's return, how he's played historically behind great offensive lines. His performance is more directly tied to an offensive line's level of play than other quarterbacks, particularly quarterbacks that are mobile, like J.J. McCarthy playing with a worse offensive line in 23 than he did in 2022, yet he got a lot better. It's because he's mobile, maneuverable. He has the talent and the skill set required to where his performance doesn't strongly correlate or doesn't correlate as much with offensive line play like a more pro-style quarterback such as McNamara. A better OC, adding that in, means the offense will get better. Now, how much better, I don't know exactly, but I know it will improve and will probably be better not just than this year's unit or this past year's unit in 23. I think it'll be better than the 2022 unit as well. The defense returns Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson at linebacker, the commanders of the unit, along with most starters. DeJean departing for the NFL will hurt, but Castro should command one of college football's best defensive back units. Combine that with a linebacker room that will be one of the best in the Big Ten, and this defense is going to be insane. Now, Drew Stevens at kicker struggled late last season, but I do expect a bounce back there. And at punter, whoever starts at punter, I'm telling you, will be good. The reputation there, the development and coaching of LeVar Woods, it's the same thing with Phil Parker. An example is Ethan Hurkett, or another player, for example, is Deshaun Lee. These are players who, when I worked on constructing my all Big Ten team, they weren't rated all that highly, let's say, by Pro Football Focus, and or they didn't get as many snaps as other players did because they weren't starters last season or they were rotational. And yet, I have faith that they're going to be good, great players because it's a Phil Parker defense. I mean, Iowa on my all Big Ten team is, I think, third, and they're pretty close to the top two teams who I'll just won't mention for the sake of I want people to be curious, and those things will be talked about more in my future all Big Ten team videos and my Big Ten prediction videos. Iowa is third out of 18 teams in players listed on my all Big Ten team, and most of them are on defense and special teams and the offensive line. And everywhere else outside of tight end, they don't have anyone. I mean, they're so good at the positions they're good at. They're very specific. They can be and they are hyper-focused. They're specialized. This is a specialized program for defense, special teams, and while in recent memory, not at an elite level, but historically and at different times over the past 3 seasons, they've had a specialization on the offensive line. The 2024 schedule features only one opponent who finished 2023 ranked. That's Ohio State. It's a game that's on the road. It's a game that I think will be a loss. Now, nothing's guaranteed, but Ohio State's going to be power ranked better than Iowa. They have better talent. I think they have a better coaching staff. And it's on the road in Columbus against a team that has better coaching and a team that has superior talent. It's off a bye, and I think that Ohio State, with their questions on offense last year and entering this season, there's a chance that Ohio State will find itself playing in more close games yet again, which plays to Iowa's style, but I'd still chalk that up as a loss, and I think that's very reasonable. Every other game, whether it's Illinois State in Week 1, Iowa State in Week 2, Troy in Week 3, Minnesota in Week 4, Washington in Week 7, Michigan State in Week 8, Northwestern in Week 9, Wisconsin in Week 10, UCLA in Week 11, Maryland in Week 13, or Nebraska Week 14, Iowa will likely be favored over every single one of those 11 teams outside of Ohio State. An 11-1 Iowa likely, this is especially the case if they don't reach the Big Ten championship game, which given their easy schedule is actually likely. Iowa would probably have to go 12-0 to make the Big Ten championship game because Michigan, Penn State, or Oregon, for example, going 11-1, in my opinion, they have either similar schedules or tougher schedules. Them going 11-1, because they have a tougher schedule, they would get the bid to Indianapolis over Iowa. Same also goes for Ohio State. So an 11-1 Iowa, especially considering the fact that they probably don't make the Big Ten championship game, which means they're guaranteed to only have one loss, that's a team that'll participate in the college football playoff. That is. And Iowa absolutely can go 11-1. And this is a team that, with the defense and with the offense likely making some improvements, if everything goes right for them and the Big Ten has a down year on offense, I think this is especially the case if Oregon or Penn State don't participate against Iowa in a hypothetical Big Ten championship game matchup. Maybe the Hawkeyes do have a chance. Not going to predict it. I don't think that Iowa has a particularly high ceiling, but they do have a higher ceiling than they have in previous seasons. So that's all I have to say in this video. I think that Iowa does have several advantages compared to other Big Ten and college football programs. They have an easy schedule. They have elite trench play, elite defense, solid disciplined special teams, and overall veterancy at every position. And they made improvements on staff and improvements on starters. For example, at quarterback, with Deacon Hill being replaced by Cade McNamara, granted that he doesn't get injured in spring or summer camp. Have a great day, guys, and thank you so much for watching the video and also for sponsoring the channel if you're a Patreon member. Thanks to Crash2488 for being a Heisman member, Spencer Bringhurst, Chris Lane, and SFS and Nerd for being All-American members, and Will Loftus, Gabriel Calendar, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Zubin Zah, and Janisha Cockrell for being all conference members. Have a great day, guys, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.